students who provide assistance and guidance to. Sorry, is there any? No, you are saying something. Sorry. So before starting, I request everyone to please mute their mics so that there are no disturbances. Thank you. Okay, so Bahujan Economists are a group of economic students from Bahujan communities who provide assistance and guidance to young Bahujan scholars to pursue higher education. We strive to create a space in economics that is inclusive of historically oppressed communities in India. Today's discussion is about the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns that locked children in India out of their schools for more than 1.5 years now. Their offline education was suddenly made online without much considerations to accessibility and effectiveness of online teachings. To study the impact of this, the School Children's Online and Offline Learning School survey was conducted by a group of economists, George Zayes, Ritika Khera, Vipul Paikra, and Nirali Bakhala, with the help of volunteers spread across the country. The survey highlighted catastrophic consequences of online education among India's marginalized school children. In rural India, as few as only 8% of students surveyed were found to be studying online regularly. The main findings of this survey and the alarming status of online education is summarized in this short video prepared by Rhodes Scholars team. I'll be sharing that video. It's a small 2 minutes video. So let's see. I think it's visible, right?
Yeah. Are children able to study online? Do children have adequate internet access? How many even have a smartphone? And most importantly, what do parents and children want?
मेरे बच्चे पढ़ नहीं पा रहे। ऑनलाइन पढ़ाने के लिए नेट डालने के लिए 250 रुपए होंगे तब पड़ेगा और वो 250 रुपए हम सोचते कि हमारे बच्चे घर में खाना खा लें। इनमें लॉकडाउन जब से लगा तब से बच्चों की पढ़ाई बहुत खराब हो रही है। ऑनलाइन पढ़ाई समझ में नहीं आ रही बच्चों की। कभी-कभार नेटवर्क नहीं आता है और फोन बढ़िया चलता है? नहीं, फोन भी बढ़िया नहीं चलता। क्या होता है दिक्कत? खराब हो जाता है फोन, कभी चार्ज नहीं होता है। लॉकडाउन में वैसे बहुत समस्या है क्योंकि पापा का रोजगार नौकरी और हमारे पास फोन नहीं था, कीपैड फोन था, टच फोन नहीं था, तो पापा टच फोन लेके आए। फिर ऑनलाइन पढ़ाई भी शुरू हो गई और उसमें 50% समझ में आता है, इतना ज्यादा समझ नहीं आता। तो ऑनलाइन पढ़ाई हो गया, कभी बुझाता है कभी नहीं बुझाता है, कभी मोबाइल रहता है, मोबाइल को लेकर हम चले जाते हैं, फिर पढ़ नहीं पाता है। काम धंधा है नहीं कुछ, घर पे बैठे मोबाइल में बैलेंस कहाँ से डलाए, 3 महीना बैलेंस डलाए। घर में कितने फोन है? बस एक ही मेरे पास। और 6 लोग हैं ना? 6 लोग। तो सब ऑनलाइन, 4 बच्चे ऑनलाइन क्लास जाते हैं, तो कैसे मैनेज करते हो आप? कभी हफ्ते में 2 बार देते हैं, 3 बार देते हैं, बस 2 बार 3 बार। अब हम मोबाइल भी खरीदें तो बच्चों का पेट भरे, कि अपना पेट भरे तो बच्चों का मोबाइल खरीद के दे, उनकी पढ़ाई करवा देते हैं। हम आप गरीब आदमी नहीं, हम फोन ले सकते, फिर भी बच्चों के लिए फोन लेके दिया भी है। तो बच्चे आजकल फोन पे, तो पढ़ाई मेरे बच्चों की कमी हो रही है। लड़की यस चाहते हैं कि कोई या तो कंप्यूटर भी सीख सकते। Finance cost department
Am I still audible? I'm sorry, I think I got disconnected. Am I audible now? Yeah, okay. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the survey highlighted what most of us should have known, that, online education is not accessible to children, to most of the marginalized students, because we have, like, when I was surveying, I saw a lot of students who did not even have simple mobile phones, leave aside the smartphones that they had. So the basic facility that one would need, a smartphone to access online education, was not there. Even if parents could afford to get their children their smartphones, the question remained that who will get them the money to recharge for the internet. Even if you get that money, then you have more than one children in your home who are studying. How are you going to provide online education to everyone at the same time? These were the very basic questions that we feel that the government did not care about while completely shifting education to online. I think Mohit can go first and talk about his experience as a volunteer for the school survey. Mohit has done masters in economics from Madras School of Economics. He is currently a research associate at Good Business Lab, and he is also a member of Bahujan Economists. So, Mohit, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Sejaswini, for the introduction. I would first of like to thank BE for giving me this opportunity, and to Professors Ritika and John for taking on this initiative of school rebooking and carrying out the survey. So, since both Ritika and John will be talking about the findings for the survey and the way ahead, I will try to present more of a qualitative perspective here, through my experiences, through the people I encountered, and through the stories that I heard from people. So let me start with the case of 9 years old Raja Mandal, who lives in a basti in Jaipur. Uh, so he was studying in class 2 before the pandemic in a nearby government primary school. And since the lockdown, there have been no online classes, no arrangements have been made for online classes, or there have been no arrangements for offline or any other community education, or the school has basically not done anything since the lockdown. So Raja was promoted to class 3, and without any exams or without having really learned much. And since he was promoted to class 3, he hasn't really taken any classes, and he now has effectively dropped out from the system. Uh, he just sits at home and has nothing to do. He would just go out and play, and his parents are now like worried that he has lost a lot of the things that he had learned before, and now they are just worried what will happen for his future, and how much of a time will it take to make up for all the learning loss that happened. But uh, Raja, however, is not alone. There are countless children like him in that basti and everywhere else in India, right? As we know, so those children have no access to smartphones, and they've had to effectively like drop out any due to lack of any support from the state. So this basti that I visited in Jaipur had many other such children who were enrolled in the nearby government school, and the only time they got to visit the school was when it was distributing ration, which was say once or twice a month. Other than that, there had been no communication or say support uh, from the school or the teachers or anyone else in the community for these offline children, as we call them. So most children in that locality were either sitting idle at home, or they had started, working. They had started helping out their fathers in their small businesses, or either that, or they had nothing else to do. And most parents that I met were like really, really worried about the future of their children and what might happen. And with like each passing day, they were like becoming more and more hopeless about what lied ahead. And the people in that basti, some of the people that I met in this basti, and like many other in India, obviously were struggling to survive. So we went to this home of a woman uh, who told us that they basically had very little money to buy even the basic necessities that were required to sustain themselves. And she told us that since the lockdown, there have been several instances when they had to rely on the ration that they got from school to survive at survive at home. So that is that is how they have been surviving. And so online education for families like that is simply a myth. It doesn't exist. Uh, Given all the economic devastation that the COVID-19 has caused, the brunt of the crisis has been faced by people at the margins, right? So people who were not doing good earlier are doing worse now. So families such as this one, they can neither afford a good private school, or they cannot afford a phone or even an internet connection. They are struggling to survive, and the state has basically left them to fend for themselves. Uh, However, one important thing note here that this problem is not exclusive to offline children only. Even those who did have one smartphone in their home, where 4 or 5 people had shared one smartphone, even they were facing serious issues. So take the case of this another 9-year-old Shivani Yadav. So her school, she went to a private school, just marginally better than the nearby government school. So they were providing her online material, but since the only smartphone in the family belonged to her father, who used to leave early and return late because he used to work as a delivery executive at one of Zomato. So he used to leave early and came home late. So Shivani was not able to study online. He would leave around 7 or 8 and come back by 10 or 11. So which would leave Shivani no time to study at all. And so Shivani also, even though she did have access to a phone, and her school was providing her some material, say a video or even a document, but she was not able to study because the only phone that was there in her house was not available to her when she needed it to study. And the school basically refused to provide any support, and a lot of parents also complained about being kind of harassed by the private schools for fees. They were like, all of them want us to pay the fee, but they are not teaching anything, they are not providing anything, they're not providing any sort of support, and but we are being harassed. Quite a few people in Quite a few people that I met had also shifted from private to government schools because either they were unable to pay the fee, or they felt that it's better to just shift to the government school rather than stay in private and pay the high fees. Similarly, I came across this a girl called Chandni. She had 3 other school-going siblings in her house, and her father worked nearby as a casual labor. So only he was the only person who had a smartphone in the family. So what he used to do was, whenever he left for work, he used to leave his smartphone at home so that all 4 of his children could study. But since all 4 of them shared the same device, none of them were able to get enough time on the phone to properly do online classes, or even communicate with the friends, or uh, help participate in, say, doubt solving sessions or anything. So even though they did have a phone, they were just barely struggling to study. They weren't able to study. Not They were not able to study satisfactorily in any sense of the word. And so, as I said, that there are many children like this who either do not have any access, or even if they do have access, it is partial at best. And those of us who have taken online classes like I did for good part of the last year know how difficult it is to study virtually, right? So even with all the resources at our disposal, we're not able to study properly, we're not able to grasp the concepts, we're not able to focus and all those things. But these are all these concerns come into play when we have the resources, but vast majority of our students, especially the children, they do not even have access to such resources. So we can only imagine what the situation must be like for people or children at the margins who have little no means. So, so even those children, I did encounter a couple of people who had, say, whose parents had some sort of education. So there was this girl called Himani whose mother worked as an Anganwadi worker. She has a BA degree, and so in the day she goes to the nearby local Anganwadi, takes care of children there. Then she comes at home and tries to help her kids. But her kids have stopped studying online because they said that they cannot understand anything that's taught to them. So as a result, they have forgotten just about everything they had learned in the past 2 years. So even someone who had an educated mother and who had access are not able to study at because for children you require face-to-face personal interaction, and you require to give them a lot of guidance and all these things. And a lot of children like Himani are struggling to learn, and they are basically, a lot of them have stopped just learning altogether. So, but however, it is important to note that these disparities that we see today have merely been amplified by the pandemic. They were not created by the pandemic. Such disparities have always existed. The state of education in our government or even private schools has always been abysmal for a long time now. So, like, all of us have heard stories of what happens in public schools or even some private schools, and what happens there in the name of providing education. The school doesn't care, the teachers don't really care, and the administration could not really care less either. So these children were already left to fend for themselves, more or less left to fend for themselves before the pandemic. But now after the pandemic, these inequalities or these disparities have been amplified multiple fold because of any because of lack of any thoughtful policy making on part of this. So now these inequalities of, say, caste, class, and gender, as we know, has always existed within our society and the educational system. So therefore, it is not really a surprise when we see that it is the children from the lower caste who are facing the brunt of the crisis. So during the survey, some of my colleagues also encountered, say, horrific instances of casteism, like in Latehar in Jharkhand. So where the upper caste families outright asked the surveyors that if these children from the lower caste get educated, then who is going to work in our fields? So we don't really want them to get educated. So these were also some of the instances that our team had to encounter. And if you see the findings of the survey, you'll find that only 4% of the rural Dalit or Adivasi children were studying online regularly, compared to 50%, 15% among other rural children. And so we also gave them a reading test, which required them to read a simple line. Uh, and when we found in the reading test that 45% of Dalit or Adivasi children were unable to read more than a few letters, compared to only 24% among other children from other backgrounds. So it comes as no surprise that 98% of the 98% parents of Dalit Adivasi children wanted schools to reopen as soon as possible, because they realized the harm it was doing to them, and they realized how these inequalities of caste and class have been amplified. So they were eager for their children to get back to school. So I would just like to conclude my part with just sharing my experience, sharing how it impacted me and how it put things into perspective for me. So while I was conducting this survey, it did put a lot of things into perspective for me. As a student of economics and development, I had always read about state of the marginalized in the country, but I never got to go and see it for myself. I had bookish knowledge, you could say, but going out, doing the survey, talking to the people and listening to their problems made me realize how this aspect of how this humane aspect has been missing from our policy making. So how this it's missing, and how easy it is for people who sit in these big buildings and at the center or the state levels, and how easy it is for them to miss this very crucial aspect of this connection with the people that they are making these policies for. So, and I believe that the state of apathy that we have witnessed from the governments in the past 1.5 years is exactly the thing that happens when there is a disconnect between the people who are making the policy and the people who the policy is supposed to impact. I do believe that it's very important to go out and see it for yourself when you are in such important positions of policy making. And that is why I think this survey, one of the biggest achievements of this survey was to highlight such personal stories of people throughout the country, from various parts of the country who belong to various castes and regional differences and all these things. So I think that was one of the biggest achievements of this survey. It put their stories at the forefront, it highlighted their stories, and it made a lot of people realize what exactly was happening in the country. And and so they highlighted this humane aspect of it, which I feel is always absent from our policy. So I believe that we need to highlight more such stories and more such narratives of individuals. We need to give them more space for so that we could create a more empathetic policy paradigm in our country, so that we know, so that the people who we are making the policies from can actually benefit from, and so that, yeah. So thank you very much. So yeah, I would like to conclude here.
Yes, thank you, Mohit. Our second speaker was supposed to be Muhammad Ali, but I see he somehow dropped out from the meeting, so we'll wait for him. So conducted the survey in Chandrapur, Maharashtra, on my observations on it. There was this interesting village that I went to. So I went to Nanuri village in Chandrapur, and in Nanuri there was this one hamlet called Bhimwadi, and it included mainly 20 to 25 houses, mostly of the scheduled caste Buddhist population in Maharashtra. And the interesting thing about this hamlet was most of the school children who were there in that hamlet were either in class 1 or class 2. Very small children, like almost everyone we surveyed were either newly was enrolled in class 1 or were promoted to class 2, as their parents were telling us. And none of these children could even recognize the like simple letters from our reading test. So we had this reading test in our survey, and we asked them to read, and none of them could even read alphabet. So leave alone any words. And obviously, because these were the children who never have been to school, because even children who have been in class 2 were enrolled last year, and they went to school only when they got enrolled. And after that, they never. So, can the whoever has their mic on, can you please mute yourself? Yeah, thank you. So I was telling about these children who were enrolled in school last year and never could see their schools, and the only instances where they could interact with their school teacher were either when they got enrolled or when they were delivering to them. Now these children, I mean, at least for most of us, our parents might teach us basics, alphabets and all, but the households we went to, and when we asked their parents that do you teach your children reading or writing, which we pre-assume that parents may, but most of them said that they do not. And the reason why for them was they either don't get time for it, because most of them were agricultural laborers, and many of them lacked formal education, so they didn't know how to teach their children. Or even if they know how to teach their children, they don't listen to them, because they said it's only in the school that they get their formal education. The teacher is trained to teach these children. It's not the parents who can, without any formal education, can teach them. So but most of the talks around school opening, like we have seen that schools have opened in few states, but most of them have focused on the upper primary schools or the secondary school. Your policies will always come around around those children, but we don't address how children who have lost their initial years of schooling are going to cope up with it. So Bhimwadi was one such village where I had a lot of questions around all this. And yeah, and okay, folks said Alimuddin sir is here. Great. So Alimuddin sir, can आप मुझे सुन पा रहे हो क्या? आप अनम्यूट करके बात कर सकते हो? Just give me 2 minutes to onboard him and we will start. I can't see him, by the way, folk. If you are in contact with him, can you talk to him?
It's back.
He has joined back.
I can't see. Mohit, can you talk to him? हाँ, I can see. अलीमुद्दीन सर, क्या आप मुझे सुन पा रहे हो? अगर आप बात कर सकते हो तो can't hear him, right? I can't hear him. Let me ask what happened. अलीमुद्दीन सर, क्या आप सुन पा रहे हो? I think it will take some time to onboard him. Ritika, can I move to you and ask you some questions? I think still Alimuddin is on board. Okay, so yeah.
It
so,
feels like an
I would
exam,
first
but ask.
like to introduce. Okay. So I would first like to introduce Ritika. Professor Ritika Kheda is a development economist, and she was also the one who conducted this survey and prepared this report. Ritika, most of the talks that accessibility and effectiveness of online education in India, but there were a few interesting and very important points also that came out of the report, among which were the dropout rates among school children, which obviously increased, and also the concerns that people have about the stopping, the midday meals were also not available to children. We also got to know, so there was this one question that we got from a Google form, Sunita, which was mentioned that schools in Bihar has opened since last 2 months, but they still haven't started midday meals. So what do you think would be the repercussions or consequences of such cases in the long run? And few people also asked that how can we rehabilitate these children who have been dropped out of schools? What role does institutions like Panchayat and other government play in rehabilitating these children?
Okay, Tejaswini, your voice was breaking quite a lot. But I think I picked up a few things. One is you said something about dropouts as a result of the pandemic and the lockdown and the lockout as far as children are concerned. So in the survey, I should start actually by thanking all of you for arranging this discussion and also for inviting me to it. I feel slightly like a fraud because I think I did the least amount of fieldwork out of all of us who are here. I only went one half day in Delhi and one day in Alwar. Nevertheless, I did read a lot of the qualitative notes. I'm going to rely on that. As far as dropouts are concerned, we didn't directly ask any question about whether the child had dropped out. But in the course of these conversations, in a lot of instances, it did seem like there was uncertainty about whether the child would be re-enrolled. I think another thing that we are seeing much more of, and which we did document in the survey, is that children were dropping out of private schools and being moved to government schools. So हमारे sample में I'll do a little bit of Hindi and a little bit of English because I think at least one person in the chat box said कि पूरा English में इतने अच्छे से नहीं समझ आएगा. तो पूरे sample में 26% ऐसे थे जो लॉकडाउन से पहले प्राइवेट स्कूल में एनरोल थे और अब उनका नामांकन गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में हो गया है. सो दैट इज वन सेंस ऑफ not really drop out, but certainly this kind of shift that is happening. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's hard to say because in a sense, if it tends to be the better of children who go to private schools. And if those children stay in government schools, like throughout now, you may have more voice and more pressure on the government school system to perform better. So this is like that exit voice and loyalty argument that Hirschman makes. अगर common schooling system होगा, हम सब एक ही type के school में जाएं, तो जो government school system कमजोर हुआ है वो फिर से थोड़ा सा हो सकता है कि माँ बाप के बोलने से ठीक होने लगेगा. And I think that is linked to the last question that you raised about what to do for these children. Amongst other things that we need to worry about, one is the thing कि learning loss या भूल गए हैं वो वाला problem तो है ही. Another thing is कि जो सिस्टम चल रहा था, जैसे भी चल रहा था सरकारी स्कूल सिस्टम, उसमें 90s के दशक में एक बहुत बड़ी लड़ाई थी कि स्कूल टीचर रेगुलरली आते हैं कि नहीं आते. Absenteeism was a big thing, and I think some progress obviously was made in the past all these 20 years or so कि टीचर्स आने लगे. और उसका कहीं कहीं पर ये भी बोलते हैं कि टीचर्स इसलिए आने लगे जब से मध्याह्न भोजन मिलने लगा. So since midday meals were started in schools, the teachers initially were forced to come because they had to at least oversee the cooking of the meal and the distribution of the meal, not so much to cook it. And over the years, not only has absenteeism declined somewhat, not adequately maybe, but also they were doing some teaching activity. अब ये हो गया है that since the past 1.5 years, उनको एक तरह से घर पे बैठने की आदत शायद पड़ गई है. तो वो जो वर्क कल्चर थोड़ा ठीक होने लगा था, थोड़ा प्रेशर बना था उसको रेगुलरली स्कूल जाना, मतलब सिर्फ बच्चों का रेगुलर स्कूल जाना जरूरी नहीं है. Teachers also have to go to school regularly for the children to benefit, right? And we know that in some states that's a pretty serious issue. और जैसे ये जो लातेहार की कहानी थी कि उस तरह का मानसिकता जो है कि ये पढ़ लिख लेंगे तो हमारे खेत में काम कौन करेगा, उस तरह की मानसिकता एक वर्ग में है, एक जाति में है, एक तरह के लोगों में है. और वो उसका क्या किया जाए वो भी सोचने वाली बात है. मध्याह्न भोजन के रुक जाने से अलग तरह के नुकसान है. Like we know that most children enjoy the midday meal because they enjoy eating together and all of that, and all these socialization benefits that came with midday. मुझे अभी भी याद है राजस्थान में 2002 में जब मिड डे मील शुरू हुआ था, मैंने छोटा सा सर्वे किया था बाड़मेर में, और उसी समय की बात है कि कुछ जो सो कॉल्ड उच्ची जाति के बच्चे थे उनको घर से बोला गया कि तुम घर से खाना लेके जाओ क्योंकि तुम्हारे स्कूल में जो खाना पकाती हैं वो या तो दलित हैं या मुसलमान है, वहां पे मुसलमान का भी चक्कर था, तो तुम्हें वो खाना खाने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है. और वो जो बच्चे थे जिनको टिफिन मिल रहा था घर से, they were going to school with the instructions that they are not supposed to eat, but when they saw the food being served and all of that, then they would quietly eat and not tell their parents कि हमने वो भी खाया और टिफिन भी खाया और सब मिलके बैठ के खाया. So, you know, those kinds of opportunities for breaking down these kinds of barriers, those have also, you know, been lost in a sense. And maybe the midday meal is a way to start the schools again, you know, because उससे क्या बच्चे attract होंगे जिनको आदत छूट गई है. जैसे तेजस्विनी बोल रही थी कि you know, they have for the parents to discipline the child at home to study, वो थोड़ा मुश्किल है. और ये भी है कि अब उनको आदत नहीं है, you know, हमको खुद को याद है कि जब हम बच्चे थे तो स्कूल जाना आफत लगती थी ना, सुबह उठ के मतलब तैयार होके स्कूल जाओ. वो वाली प्रॉब्लम्स भी सोचने लायक हैं. और इस संदर्भ में आई थिंक वन थिंग दैट आई हैव बीन गोइंग ऑन अबाउट फॉर अ लॉन्ग टाइम एंड देन आई स्टॉप इज दिसंबर में जब थोड़ा ठीक हो गया था और धीरे धीरे सब कुछ खुलने लगा था, तब आई रिमेम्बर आई वाज वेरी इरिटेटेड. मुझे सिनेमा हॉल्स को दिल्ली में परमिशन मिली थी and maybe baki rajyo mein bhi, but Anganwadis at that time nobody was paying attention to, and even now nobody is paying attention to Anganwadis. And I think Anganwadis play a really important role, right, to in preparing the child to be school ready. मतलब माँ बाप के बिना बैठना, उठना, खाना खाना, छोटी छोटी बातें हैं. लेकिन हिमाचल प्रदेश में 2019 में when we did a survey of pregnant and lactating women, we interacted actually with a brother and sister. The sister was an Anganwadi worker and the brother was a primary school teacher, and they were very upset with this government proposal which was going to combine Anganwadis with primary schools as preschool classes. And the primary school teacher was upset because he said कि ये जो छोटे बच्चे, मेरी बहन जिनको आंगनवाड़ी में संभालती है, उनको हम नहीं संभाल सकते प्राइमरी स्कूल टीचर्स, कि वो आएंगे और वो सुसु पॉटी करने लग जाएंगे और कोई रोएगा, किसकी नाक बहेगी, ये सारी चीजें वो आंगनवाड़ी में सीखते हैं. And that is like a prep school for these kids. And if that has been closed also for 1.5 years, that means it's not just the children, as you both have pointed out, who are currently in school, but also उनके पीछे जो आने वाले हैं, उनको भी और एक्स्ट्रा दिक्कत होने वाली है. वो तो उठना बैठना ही नहीं सीखे, माँ बाप के बिना बैठना ही नहीं सीखे, तो वो रोएंगे और ये सब करेंगे, तो उनके लिए भी सोचने की जरूरत है. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Ritika. I'll just check if Alimuddin sir is on board. Alimuddin sir, अगर आप यहाँ पे हैं तो आप कुछ बोल सकते हैं ताकि हम सुन पाए. I think there's some problem with his mic, I guess. He's unmuted, but we can't hear him, right? No. Okay, I think we'll wait for him for some more time. Meanwhile, I can go to Professor Drees. So Professor George Drees is an economist and also a visiting professor at D School and Ranchi University. So there has been some questions that we have got about how the government or the school is going to make up for the losses of these 2 years. Now the government, some of the state governments have started bridge courses to bring the children back on the track for their losses. But do you think that is sufficient to make up for the losses, or do you think that there should be a restructuring of curriculum and there should be pedagogical changes to address these concerns? You are muted.
Sorry, yeah. So the short answer is yes, Tejaswini. I think we do need some very radical steps to deal with this situation. Before I come to that, I'd like to say a few words about my personal experience of the survey, because I think that for most of us, it was really an eye-opening experience. And for me in particular, it was a revelation. Mohit made a very good presentation at the beginning, and so did Tejaswini. And both of you, I think, have conveyed very well both the findings of the survey and the impressions one comes away with, including the pain of the parents who are seeing their children being effectively excluded now and possibly forever from the schooling system. This is really heartbreaking. And for me, the main feeling I come out with at the end of this survey is one of a monumental injustice, an injustice that is compounded by the fact that the crisis has barely been talked about until recently and barely been noticed. And I think that reflects the fact that the privileged classes in India live in a world of their own, and they think that world is India and is the future of India, and that the rest, those who are being left behind, they will have to catch up somehow, and the policies have to be made for the future. Tejaswini said very rightly that we should have known all along that online education doesn't work for poor children, or for the vast majority of poor children. Yes, we should have known that all along. But to this day, the central government and the Prime Minister himself keep trying to create the impression that we are doing fine with online education. In fact, strikingly, the day after the report was released, as some of you may remember, the Prime Minister made a startling statement in a meeting, an official meeting on education, saying that online education had worked wonders and had saved the day during the lockdown. So that for me is quite unsettling. The extent to which poor people and Bahujan children and their families could be ignored and sidelined for so long. And in the case of Anganwadis, as Ritika mentioned, it's still that silence continues to this day. There's no talk at all of why Anganwadis are closed and the consequences for poor children. Incidentally, for those who think that the real problem is that the time is not ripe to open the schools because it's a health hazard, please note that this is not the case at all. The doctors, in fact, now are quite clearly in favor of the schools being reopened. There was an excellent advisory issued earlier this month by the Indian Academy of Preventive and Social Medicine, where they gave an excellent analysis of the situation and explained why opening the schools is important and is not a major health hazard. I'll just read one sentence from their report. They say, opening of schools is not likely to increase the risk of community transmission significantly. The IAPSM, the Indian Academy of Preventive and Social Medicine, strongly believes that this is the time for offline classes in all schools and preschool settings to be restarted. This was almost a month ago. So I think the root of the problem is not the health hazard. The root of the problem is that the privileged families are doing reasonably well with online learning. They are conscious of the health hazards for their children, and they have been resisting the reopening of school. When in our survey, we found that the overwhelming majority of parents, in fact, 97% of the parents in the rural areas, urgently want the schools to reopen. If I can mention one personal anecdote from today itself about this pain that the parents feel. This morning, I was sitting in a tea shop across the road with a visiting journalist, and there was a girl of about 11 or 12 years old there who was working in the tea shop, helping her father. So she had basically become a child laborer, and she's in class 6. She's nominally enrolled in class 6. And in Jharkhand, very recently, classes, the upper primary classes, 6 to 8, have reopened. So she should be in school, but she was either not aware that the schools had reopened, or she had not paid attention, or she had lost interest because she didn't seem to be even considering going back to school. So she has become a child laborer possibly a permanent dropout. And despite being in class 6, when I asked her to read the word chai, which was printed in very large fonts on the banner of the tea shop, she could not read the word chai, which is about the simplest word you can imagine. And you could see the pain on her father's face. We have to remember that for many of these parents, education is the only hope that they have that their children will have a better life than their own. So when they see their children being left out of the system like that, possibly permanently, obviously it's very heartbreaking. Secondly, coming to your question, Tejaswini, the other part of the injustice is that we're still not doing or even discussing what needs to be done to address the situation, to deal with this catastrophe. Let me give you the example of Jharkhand because it's pretty extreme. When we went to Mahamadar block in Natihar district of Mahamadar, Jharkhand, first of all, we found that most children there were in the sort of predicament that you and Mohit have described. They have no access to online education because there is virtually no connectivity in the entire block. So to rely on online education in a place like that is an obvious non-starter. Secondly, most of the children we met who had no access to online education had stopped studying. They were just roaming around, not always looking unhappy, but certainly missing the schools. And of course, in most cases, they had forgotten the little that they had learned earlier at school in terms of formal learning. So that's one part. But the other part is that very little is being done there to prepare for the reopening of schools. For one thing, the school buildings are falling apart. They have been empty for a year and a half. They have not been maintained. There's been a lot of seepage. In one school, the door had been taken away by somebody and the classrooms were open for cattle and so on. So that's only one small aspect of the problem, but I mention it because after that I figured out that it will actually take quite a lot of money to repair these schools. You know, the Jharkhand government is quite broke at the moment, and it's not a trivial matter at all, even just to make money available to repair these schools. And when we asked the block education officer how long he thought it would take to put the school buildings back into shape, he said, "Koi guarantee nahi." He had no idea because they don't have local funds. And he said even at the district levels, there are no funds for this. So each school will have to formulate a proposal to go to the block, then from there to the district, then to the state, and then the money will have to be sanctioned and the proposal will have to be sent back. So that process alone could take months. That's the first part. And then secondly, very little is being done in terms of preparing for this situation that is going to arise in April. I forgot one step in the story. The step is that the teachers in Jharkhand today are on election duty. The Gram Panchayat elections are coming soon. So for the next few months, they're going to be on election duty. We saw them updating the election rolls. They have been asked to update all the photographs in the election rolls. You can imagine how much work that is in that kind of area. So the teachers had no hope of having much time for the children in the next few weeks or even months. By that time, we will be pretty close to the end of this school year in March or April. And by that time, the children will be catapulted 3 years ahead of the grade in which they were before the lockdown. Or if you want to put it another way, by that time, out of the 5 primary grades, 4 grades will consist of children who basically have to start again from the beginning because most of them have forgotten most of what little they had learned earlier. So obviously, and this brings me to your question, to deal with this situation, there has to be a radical change in curriculum and pedagogy. You cannot expect them, even with a bridge course, to be able to cope with the system. In class 4 in Jharkhand today, children get not only English textbooks, aside from Hindi, which may not be their mother tongue, but they also get Sanskrit textbooks. Now, that doesn't make any sense at all to me. I don't see why a child in Jharkhand at the primary school level should be asked to learn Sanskrit when they have forgotten ka, kha, ga, ga. I would say just forget the Sanskrit for now, radically simplify the entire curriculum, restructure the teaching, rethink the pedagogy, do bridge courses by all means if it's necessary. I'm not at all against bridge courses, but not for 3 months, for years. And do whatever it takes to meet the children where they are. Even if it means forgetting the curriculum. Curriculum is not the most important thing that's happening in the school. There are many other things that are happening. As Ritika mentioned, there's the socialization of children, there's the environment, there's nutrition, there's health. Curriculum is only one part of it, and we should not let the system be driven by the curriculum. Unfortunately, none of this is even being discussed. And when we ask that same block education officer, what is being done now to prepare for this unprecedented and very difficult situation, he was quite relaxed. He said, don't worry, we are going to appoint volunteer teachers for bridge courses. The regular teachers will continue teaching the curriculum appropriate for each grade. And then these volunteer teachers will be hired for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, depending on the level of the child, to help them to get back on track. Now that really is not going to serve the purpose at all. And the most striking aspect of the attitude of that block education officer, and I'll end on this point, is this, that he had no sense of urgency. I can't remember, I think whether it's Ritika or Tejaswini who mentioned, I think it was perhaps Ritika, who mentioned this, these families, or maybe it was Tejaswini, who mentioned these families in Kutmu in Jharkhand, who were saying that if these children get educated, then who is going to work in our fields? Now, the other side of that is that many of the poor parents we talk to, they can feel that. They feel that there's a kind of conspiracy against them. Now, conspiracy may sound like a strong word, and I wouldn't say that this block education officer necessarily wants children to remain uneducated, or that he's doing something actively to prevent them from getting education. But I certainly felt that he had a tremendous lack of any sense of urgency. He was not only quite relaxed, but he was quite happy to chat about this and that. He gave us a long story from Ramayana. He was a Brahmin, by the way, in a block where almost all the families are Adivasis, at least in the rural areas. So you can see how this social distance that separates the privileged classes and castes from these children is a big factor in understanding the situation and how it developed, and the inertia that we are seeing today in facing that situation. Another way in which the caste system and the social inequalities are making it difficult to cope with this, and this brings me to a point I've already made in an earlier meeting of Bahujan economists, is that the caste system has a tendency to undermine cooperation. This is a point we were discussing the last time in the context of health, where I pointed out that health in many ways is a kind of cooperative activity, but that applies even more so to education. Education really is a cooperative activity par excellence. It is done partly by the teachers, partly by the parents, partly by the peer children, the classmates. And of course, the more cooperation there is among these different actors, the teachers, the parents, the classmates, and of course, the education administration, the better chance there is that the system will function. But when this entire community is divided by class and caste and gender, it becomes very difficult to foster the kind of cooperation that is required. I think that is a crucial factor in India's dramatic failure to put in place a functional schooling system in the last 75 years. And now we are in a situation where that system, which was already barely functional to start with, is in danger of being seriously damaged with long-term consequences for children, and especially, of course, for Bahujan children. Mohit pointed out very rightly that even within the underprivileged families that we surveyed, there was a very big gap between Adivasi and Dalit children in particular and the other families. So this is the situation we are in. The short answer to your question, Tejaswini, is that we need to do much more than what is being done at the moment. If I can end on a slightly more cheerful point, I think this survey, aside from being an eye-opening experience for many of us, I think it was also a very interesting project in terms of the method. We have done many surveys of this kind with volunteers over the years, but I think this was one of the best, because there was a real collaborative spirit and a real enthusiasm and commitment on the part of most of the volunteers. And that's how it was possible to complete not only the survey, but the data analysis and the report all within 1 month at virtually zero cost. So I think it was a very satisfying experience. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the volunteers who have participated in it, and to say what a great experience it was for me, and I hope also for many others. I'm sorry I spoke for too long. I've already made some of these points earlier, so I would rather listen to others today. But I'd be happy to address any further questions that arise. And I hope that Alimuddin now is able to speak, because we're all very keen to hear him.
Yes, but I think Ritika, you had something to say, I guess. You are not.
If his mic is working, let him speak. इतनी मुश्किल से.
Okay, so Mohit, we have Alimuddin sir with you, right?
Yeah, I have him on call.
Yes. Alimuddin sir, क्या आप सुन पा रहे हो?
हाँ, सुन रहे हैं मैडम.
हाँ जी, बिल्कुल ठीक है. तो अभी तक हम जितना भी बात किए हैं, वो हम बात कर रहे थे कि कैसे स्कूल जाने वाले बच्चों पर ये लॉकडाउन और कोविड का क्या असर हुआ है उनकी पढ़ाई पर बहुत कम लोग इस पे बात रख रहे हैं कि टीचर्स लोग जो है, स्कूल टीचर्स, उन लोगों ने इस कोविड पैंडेमिक में क्या क्या परेशानियां झेली या उनका एक्सपीरियंस कैसा रहा है. तो अगर आप उस पे अपनी बात रख सके तो प्लीज बताइए.
लॉकडाउन में विद्यालय बंद अवधि में मैडम सबसे लॉस तो बच्चा को दिया ही है. सुन रही हैं?
हाँ जी, बोलिए.
आप सुन रहे हैं मेरी बात?
हाँ हाँ, आप सुन रहे, बताइए.
हाँ, लॉकडाउन में बच्चा की स्थिति तो नहीं है एजुकेशन के मामले में. हेलो.
हाँ, Mohit, can you just do something? मतलब it's not very clearly audible, so maybe take your phone closer.
Yeah, let me try.
And please explain him the question if it is not clear from my end.
Just give me a second.
Yes, yes.
मोहित is on mute, तो कैसे सुनाई देगा?
No, he's just talking to Alimuddin sir on phone so that he explains.
Okay.
I mean, I sometimes wonder that even all of us who have so many facilities still get stuck. हाँ हाँ हाँ, बात करिए.
हाँ जी.
हाँ, कह रहे हैं कि लॉकडाउन में जो बच्चों के एजुकेशन के मामले में जो भरपाई करने के लिए सबसे पहले शिक्षक को ट्रेनिंग की आवश्यकता है, पहला चीज. और दूसरी चीज जो है, शिक्षक उपलब्ध होना मस्ट है. कहीं कहीं किसी विद्यालय में एक शिक्षक 2 शिक्षक हैं, ऐसी स्थिति में गाइडलाइन का पालन करते हुए नहीं हो पाएगा, इसलिए वहां पर शिक्षक की आवश्यकता है.
हाँ हाँ, बोलिए.
और बच्चों को एकदम स्टार्टिंग से लेकर के चलना होगा, क्योंकि बच्चा तो सब घर पर पढ़ नहीं पाया ना.
हाँ.
घर पर पढ़ नहीं पाया, इसकी वजह से उसको स्टार्टिंग से हम लोग को लेकर चलना होगा.
अलीमुद्दीन, अपना स्कूल और अपना गांव के बच्चों के बारे में थोड़ा सा अगर बताएं सबको कि किस तरह का स्कूल है और कैसे, कितने टीचर है, कितने बच्चे हैं और कैसे कैसे क्या स्थिति है उधर।
के बाद
हाँ।
हमारे विद्यालय में टोटल इनरोलमेंट 62
हम्म,
और मैं अकेला शिक्षक डिप्यूटेशन में हूँ।
हम्म,
डिप्यूटेशन में हूँ।
अच्छा, तो वहाँ भी बच्चों की क्या स्थिति होगी, जैसे मतलब क्या कर
बच्चे
रहे
की
हैं बच्चे?
बच्चे की स्थिति सब भुला गया है सर, एकदम रेगुलर जो था वो डिस्कनेक्ट हो गया एकदम बच्चा। अभी हम 15 दिन से विद्यालय में नहीं बैठा रहे हैं सर, अलग दूसरे तरफ जो है दूसरे के मकान में हम बच्चों को बुला करके बैठाते हैं। 2 घंटा 3 घंटा हम रहते हैं अलग से,
अच्छा,
क्योंकि हम विद्यालय जा ही रहे हैं तो बच्चे को बुलाते हैं। तो अभी हमको एकदम बिल्कुल स्टार्टिंग से उन लोग को फिर हम शुरू किए हैं, एकदम नीचे स्तर से शुरू किए हैं, धीरे 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 धीरे।
तो
यही तो है सर।
तो बच्चों को आ रहा है सब समझ, या कैसा बच्चे कैसा चल रहा है उनका भी पढ़ाई?
नहीं 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 नहीं, बच्चा को हमको टफ हो गया सर। बच्चा चूंकि सब कुछ भुला गया है, सब भुला गया है। हमको स्टार्टिंग से फिर वही तो कह रहे हैं कि एकदम नीचे स्तर से लेके चल रहे हैं ना, एकदम नीचे स्तर से हम लेके चल रहे हैं। हम अलग बैठाते हैं, विद्यालय में नहीं बैठाते हैं सर, क्योंकि विद्यालय में बैठाने का अभी हम लोग को ऑर्डर नहीं है विभाग से। तो हम अलग बच्चों को बैठाते हैं, दूसरे के घर में बैठाते हैं, क्योंकि हम प्रतिदिन जा नहीं है। हम बच्चों के साथ लेकर के बैठते हैं, उन लोगों को देखते हैं, पढ़ाते हैं। जितना में छोड़े थे उस तरह का नहीं रह गया, एकदम नीचे स्तर से लेकर के हमको स्टार्ट करके चलना पड़ रहा है। सारे बच्चे सब भूल गए। और ऑनलाइन की बात जहां तक है, हम प्रतिदिन तो कंटेंट भेज देते हैं उन लोग के मोबाइल में, लेकिन सबके पास मोबाइल नहीं है। और मोबाइल जिसके पास है भी तो वो बच्चे को कंटेंट नहीं दिखा सकता है, नहीं दिखाता है। ऑनलाइन की पढ़ाई जो है गवर्नमेंट कह रही है कि ऑनलाइन ये सक्सेसफुल नहीं है ग्रामीण क्षेत्र के लिए।
तो आपने भी ऑनलाइन में क्या क्या किया है, जैसे कितनी कुछ
ऑनलाइन में जो कंटेंट हम लोग को मिलता है गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से, जो मिलता है विभाग की तरफ से मिलता है, शिक्षा विभाग की तरफ से, उसको हम लोग डिस्चार्ज करके उसको भेज देते हैं। उसके मोबाइल व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप में हम बना हुआ है, हर क्लास का व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप हम बनाए हैं, तो उसके पे भेज देते हैं। लेकिन उसके बारे में जब बच्चा से पूछते हैं कि तुम्हारे पिताजी, तुम्हारी माँ तुमको मोबाइल दिखाया, तो नहीं, ये सब चीज होती है।
अलीमुद्दीन सर, सो अभी तो सरकार की तरफ से कोई बात नहीं हो रही है कि स्कूल शुरू करना चाहिए या नहीं करना चाहिए। तो वो अगर आपकी राय, तो मतलब हम समझ सकते कि आप सब लोग यही चाहते होंगे कि स्कूल शुरू हो, पर अगर स्कूल शुरू भी होता है तो आपको लगता है कि सरकार या स्कूल मतलब कितना सक्षम है ऑफलाइन मतलब स्कूल शुरू करने के लिए? क्योंकि अगर शुरू करते हैं तो कोविड के मतलब सारा गाइडलाइंस आपको फॉलो करना पड़ेगा। आपको स्कूल का मतलब समय में स्कूल शुरू करना है, तो क्या आपको लगता है कि ये सब करने के लिए आपकी स्कूल या सरकार से मतलब कोई मदद मिल रही है, या स्कूल सक्षम है स्कूल शुरू करने के लिए? Mohit, please explain if I wasn't clear, if my Hindi wasn't very clear.
So तेजस्विनी पूछ रही है कि मतलब आपको लगता है जो सब सरकारी कैरियर स्कूल खोलो अब जैसे 9वीं 10वीं 11वीं 12वीं खुल रही है तो लेकिन
स्कूल तो
उसके लिए
खोलना
इतनी
चाहिए।
गाइडलाइंस वगैरह फॉलो करनी पड़ेगी, आपको लगता है आपका स्कूल या आपका जो प्रशासन
हाँ,
है
गाइडलाइन के तहत स्कूल खोलनी चाहिए।
हाँ तो आपको लगता है वो तैयारी है वहाँ गाइडलाइन की तरह, मतलब उसके तहत स्कूल खोल दिया जाए, या आपको लगता है कि आप एक मतलब सही तरीके से आप खोल पाएंगे स्कूल बच्चों के लिए जो बच्चों के लिए सेफ भी रहे, और आपको लगता है कोई प्रशासनिक मुसीबतें कोई अगर आए ऐसी, या आपका क्या ख्याल है उस पर?
उसमें मेरा 2 तरह का नजरिया है। पहला नजरिया है कि जहाँ पर एक शिक्षक है वहाँ सारे बच्चों को नहीं बुलाया जाए, सारे क्लास के बच्चों को 1 से 5 क्लास के बच्चों को एक ही दिन में नहीं बुलाया जाए, क्योंकि कमरे की भी कमी, दूसरी चीज शिक्षक की कमी, तो वो बच्चे को सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग के साथ बैठा नहीं पाए और सारे क्लास को टेकअप नहीं कर पाए।
Oh, have we lost him? No, wait.
He is spoken this part. Do you have any other questions for him?
What happened?
अच्छा, चैट में कोई पूछ रहा है कि आपने इस साल टीचिंग के अलावा भी कोई नॉन टीचिंग ड्यूटी करी है, जैसे पंचायत के इलेक्शन में या कोई और ड्यूटी से
कोविड वाला ड्यूटी हम लोग किए थे, कोविड का वैक्सीनेशन का ड्यूटी किए हैं, और इस बार इस अवधि में किसी तरह का कोई ड्यूटी नहीं लगा।
इस साल आप पे ड्यूटी नहीं लगा, आप ये कह रहे हैं?
नहीं, इस बार इलेक्शन तो हुआ ही नहीं है, तो उसमें नहीं लगा। हाँ, जो टीचर बीएलओ काम करते हैं, वोटर आईडी का काम करते हैं, उन लोग को ड्यूटी लगा, उन लोग को ड्यूटी लगा। ओके ओके।
Thank you, Alimuddin sir. Jo, Ritika, do you have any questions to ask him or anybody else? Because we might lose him soon. So.
मैं पूछना चाह रहा था, अलीमुद्दीन आप कह रहे हैं कि 62 बच्चे हैं अभी आपके स्कूल में, तो क्या आपको लगता है कि 62 बच्चे वापस आएंगे स्कूल जब खुलेगा, या उसमें से कुछ बच्चे नहीं आ पाएंगे? और इन बच्चों का एनरोलमेंट ड्राइव जैसे अभी तक कुछ काम हुआ झारखंड में, जिसमें घर घर जाके बच्चों का गिनती कर रहे हैं और इनका एनरोलमेंट का तैयारी कर रहे हैं?
I think I lost him, John. Should I call him again?
Yeah, I think the question of dropout we have to ask to him.
Okay, हाँ, एक सेकेंड
Connecting again.
हाँ।
Yeah. Online is so difficult, no?
While he's connecting, I'll say what I had to say earlier, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay.
हिंदी में?
No, so this was
हिंदी में?
हिंदी
हाँ।
में नहीं डिसाइड हुआ था कि some people don't follow Hindi, so English only. It was for Alimuddin that we were doing in Hindi mainly. नहीं, जो पहले जॉन ने बोला ना कि जो गरीब लोग हैं या बहुजन लोग हैं और उनके बच्चों की पढ़ाई का इतना जबरदस्त नुकसान हो रहा है और बाकी दुनिया को कुछ पड़ी नहीं है, मतलब हम तो ऐसे चल रहे हैं जैसे कुछ इतना हुआ नहीं. And in that context, I remember 2 statements that Javadekar has made in the past 1.5 years. पहले जब पहली बार लॉकडाउन हुआ, so he said that, oh, don't worry about this lockdown, we will rerun Mahabharata and Ramayana for you so that while you're locked up at home, आप लोग ये TV serial देख सकते हो. सो मतलब उनके दिमाग में वही सेगमेंट है जो टीवी देखता है, जो रामायण महाभारत देखता है, मतलब उनकी कॉन्शियसनेस सिर्फ उन तक सीमित है। और दूसरा, फिर दिसंबर में शायद विंटर सेशन में पार्लियामेंट में उन्होंने कहा कि ऑनलाइन शिक्षा की वजह से कोई डिनाई नहीं हुआ और हमने टीवी क्लासेस भी चलाई हैं। और एक्चुअली इवन फॉर मी, I wrote in May this digital divide वाला whatever, decoding inequality in a digital world, और उसमें भी मैंने बोला कि हाँ सिर्फ इतने शहरी क्षेत्र में 42% have internet access, but in rural areas it's very low. But this survey is also showing that it's not just a rural issue ना, कि urban areas में भी access तो पहला barrier है, जैसे तेजस्विनी पहले बोल रही थी, पर हर कदम पे पेरेंट्स के लिए कितनी स्ट्रगल है। जो पढ़ा लिखा नहीं है वो वैसे लाचार है कि मैं कैसे अपने बच्चे को पढ़ाऊं, और जो पढ़ा लिखा है वो अपनी कमाई के लिए जाएं या उनको घर पे डिसिप्लिन करें, और वैसे भी वो ट्रेन टीचर्स नहीं है, ट्रेन नहीं ऑन दिस एक्सपेक्टेशन दैट पेरेंट्स विल or literate or educated parents will be able to teach is also a little bit unfair. And on this question of reopening safely and all that, after the survey एक TV debate था, और उसमें मतलब थोड़ा I guess centrist या right wing type टीवी था, डिबेट था, उसमें मैंने बोला कि स्कूल खोलने की बात की, तो ऐसे मेरे पे टूट पड़े कि अरे बच्चों के सेफ्टी की चिंता नहीं है, and how can you talk like this? And then somebody else thankfully said that how come these questions only arise when you talk about reopening schools or reopening Anganwadis for that matter, right? How come these concerns aren't discussed? If you have been able to put protocols in place for other things to reopen, then surely cinema halls are closed air-conditioned spaces, right? These schools in the bulk of the country, they're open, ventilated, which is the best kind of reopening that is required. So it's also very important comment on priorities. I mean, it's a very self-evident thing to say, but sometimes it's helpful to say it, कि सिनेमा हॉल ज्यादा प्रायोरिटी है, इकोनॉमी सबसे ऊंची प्रायोरिटी है, और शिक्षा तो मतलब सबकॉन्शियस में भी नहीं है। और जो चीज मोबिलिटी के लिए, सोशल मोबिलिटी के लिए सबसे अहम है, दैट इज लाइक नॉट ऑन द रेडार एट ऑल।
Yes, thank you. Mohit, bring Alimuddin sir.
हाँ, तो अलीमुद्दीन जहाँ पूछ रहे थे कि आपके जो 62 बच्चे स्कूल में भर्ती हो रखे हैं, उनमें से आपको लगता है कितने लोग वापस आएंगे, और जो लोग नहीं वापस आएंगे आपको क्या लगता है कि उनको वापस लाने के लिए क्या किया जाना चाहिए आपके द्वारा, सरकार के द्वारा, या कुछ और कदम जो उठाए जाने चाहिए, तो उस पर आपके क्या ख्याल है?
मेरे द्वारा तो हम उस बच्चे के घर घर जाते हैं और उसके गार्जियन से, पेरेंट्स से संपर्क करके उस बच्चे को लाने का प्रयास करते हैं, मेरे द्वारा। गवर्नमेंट की बात है, गवर्नमेंट की बात तो मैं नहीं बता सकता, अब गवर्नमेंट की क्या नीति है।
तो आपको क्या लगता है कितने बच्चे आपके 62 बच्चों में से वापस आ जाएंगे जो भर्ती हो रखे हैं?
62 में हमारे पास 50 से एवर बच्चा आ जाता है।
अच्छा।
10-12 बच्चे, कभी वो आया तो कभी वो नहीं आया, इस तरह से करके आता है बच्चा।
अच्छा।
बच्चे आते हैं, ऐसी बात नहीं है, बच्चे आते हैं।
ठीक है, ठीक।
अभी 6 to 8 का खुला है क्लास। हेलो।
हाँ बोलिए।
हेलो।
हाँ बोलिए बोलिए।
अभी 6 to 8 का क्लास जो खुला हुआ है, उसमें हम देख रहे हैं कि बच्चे विद्यालय जा रहे हैं, क्योंकि बच्चे भी ये हो गए हैं कि इतने दिन लंबा अवधि तक विद्यालय बंद रहा, स्कूल आने के लिए बच्चा तड़प रहा है, ये बात है।
अच्छा।
हाँ,
ठीक है, धन्यवाद। कोई और सवाल है इनके लिए?
Okay. If there are no
जैसे आप बोले सर कि जो बच्चे विद्यालय नहीं आ पाते हैं उसको लाने के लिए क्या करना है, आप बोले ना सर, अभी प्रश्न रखे ना, क्या कर सकते हैं आप? तो हम लोग तो जगह करते हैं, उसमें आप लोग अपना भी कीजिएगा सर, कुछ टेक्निक अपनाइएगा जिसके चलते भी बच्चे आए। गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से भी आप लोग ये रखिएगा कि उससे टोटल के टोटल बच्चे आए। मेरा यही कहना है।
ठीक है, धन्यवाद।
Thank you, sir. I can briefly summarize what he has been saying. So he highlighted that how, if you want to restart the school again, open the school again, you need to provide those trainings to the teacher to handle the situation. And also he was saying that since teachers have been, I think I am audible, right? Yeah, okay. You're saying that since children have been away from school for such a long time, then you will have to give them a lot of time. I mean, you have to give them a considerable amount of time to get them on track with whatever that has been left out in the last 2 years. He clearly said that there is no online access to most of his children. And online, this is his sentence, he says that online education is not successful. And when Mohit asked him about what kind of online teaching he has been doing, he said that they have some group where they get some they get some education material and they just forward it to students. But when they go to students and ask them whether they have received or whether their parents have told them that they got some message or some online stuff from education stuff from school, they say that their parents haven't told them or they don't. So basically the forward messages disguised as education or disguised as online education never reached them. And so we also asked him about how do you think school should open, like what arrangement they should do if they have to open the school. He mentioned that their school have some around 62 students and he's the only one teaching them. But if you have to start the school, then maybe don't call all the students together, because we know that social distancing guidelines still holds. So call them in batches, few students today and few of them tomorrow. So this kind of arrangements are very doable, and I think the government can definitely do it, but we don't know why they're not doing it. And he also said that children are very eager to come back to school, because they have been locked out of school since last 1.5 years. So it's not that children don't want to come to school, they're very eager to come to school. So these are the points that he mentioned. Now I think we should just quickly go through the question answer session, and we are anyway running short on time. So there's just one question that I had in mind, and somebody else also wrote to us through Google Form. The question was about, while we are talking about the learning losses and, how children are suffering, but is this something that is very peculiar to COVID pandemic, or is this something, are we assuming that everything was good before the pandemic started? Are we assuming that the offline teaching that used to happen before the pandemic in the government schools particularly was all well? I mean, were the children still able to, read and write fluently in class 3, class 4? So can we take this? I mean, this was the question that we got then. The person asked, can we take this movement to, redefine the schooling system in India? Can we at least start a discussion around that? So Ritika, Joy, anyone who would want to take up that question?
Joy, you want to say something?
You're welcome to start. I don't think any of us claim in our wildest dreams that the schooling system was fine before lockout. Obviously, it was not. In fact, I made a point to mention that it was barely functional to start with, barely functional, and also quite pathological in terms of the inequalities of access. I mean, I think we're too used to the schooling system in India to realize how odd it is, I mean, by international norms in terms of stratification with different opportunities for different children, huge commercial private sector, which doesn't exist in many countries. I mean, I was brought up in Belgium, and very few people in Belgium would have ever even thought at that time, and I think probably even today, of sending their children to private commercial schools. There were many private non-profit schools, and private non-profit schools are sometimes some of the best, including in India. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with private non-profit schools, but a commercial school is something that in those days, at least in Belgium, would have been considered very odd. So the Indian system is very stratified, fragmented. Even within the public schooling system, there are all kinds of different opportunities. There are Navodaya Vidyalaya, there are Kasturba schools, there are very good schools, there are terrible schools. It all depends on where you are in the class and caste and gender system. And accordingly, you get different opportunities. So I think, as Ritika said, this is a good time to reflect on this and to think about what can be done to make it a more rational and more equitable schooling system. And we really have a very long way to go.
I'll just quickly add one small thing. Just before the survey started, actually, in August sometime, somebody I know in Delhi, very well-meaning person, very nice person. It was pouring a lot in Delhi, and she went for a walk in the park near my house. और वहां पे बहुत पानी जमा हो गया, और उस पानी में पास की किसी बस्ती के बच्चे ना जैसे तैर रहे थे या खेल रहे थे. So she was very excited and she said, look, the children are having so much fun and it's great. तो उसी टाइम हम लोगों ने बात शुरू कर दी थी स्कूल खोलने के बारे में, and that's how she told me. She said, look, she had taken a picture of those people, the children who were having fun. And then she said, हम लोग लखनऊ गए थे, वहाँ हमारा खेत का केयरटेकर है, उसका बच्चा उसके साथ खेती कर रहा है, वो सीख रहा है. So I feel, yes, we should rethink all these, terrible pedagogical methods that we had and have, but also guard against going in this other direction where skill training and this little bit Gandhian, कि उनको skill सिखा दो और वही ठीक है और उसका बच्चा बस हल ही चलाएगा. That kind of thing is also hidden somewhere in this spectrum, and I just wanted to say we should be guarding against that. The problem, of course, is that right now there's hardly any state, not even Tamil Nadu, where you would expect some. They've not even been talking about reopening primary schools. So वो ही नहीं खोलेंगे तो बाकी देश में क्या हम उम्मीद रखेंगे?
Yes, okay. There's this one question in the chat box. It asks, did you come across any sort of gender bias where parents supported education of male children as compared to female children in terms of providing smartphone or internet?
I think the gender bias was more visible in other ways, not necessarily in this way. तो मतलब हमारे sample में in any case the proportion who had a dedicated smartphone was very small, है ना, उस बच्चे के लिए. तो वो तो सवाल ही नहीं होता. इधर उधर I think एक दो in the qualitative notes we found that the boy was being privileged over the girl, but एक दो cases में investigators ने ये भी लिखा कि the girl was being privileged over the boy. But I think the girls do have to struggle extra and they must be even more desperate than the boys to return to school, क्योंकि उन पे काम का घर के काम का बोझ और expectations ज़्यादा होती है. And quite frankly, I'm at IIT Delhi, even amongst our students, we are finding that some of the girls who want to come back, they're saying I'm expected to do household work. None of the boys have put that down as a reason. तो उस तरह से gendered differences हैं, not necessarily in the online access part.
I think another important gender dimension is that among the parents, it's very often the women, and particularly the women who work outside the household, who have been worst affected by the situation, because it's very hard for them, obviously, to have to look after the children the whole day, or to have to worry about where the children are, what they're doing, and so on and so forth. When the children are at school, at least they have some reassurance that the children are safe and they're doing something useful, and they are being fed also, which also means less work at home to prepare the midday meal. So I think the women, the working mothers in particular, and the single women especially, have been among the worst victims of this situation.
Please unmute yourself if you are not speaking. Okay. There's this one question which says, since the onset of pandemic, most of the schools have shifted to online classes, which is creating a lobby for edtech companies to promote their products in the ecosystem, which indirectly aims to replace the teachers in school. How can we ensure that these products complement teachers and not substitute them? Mohit, you can mute participants. I can't. Can you do it? Yeah, thank you. So the question was about these edtech companies and how can we ensure that they remain as a complement to teachers and not a substitute?
I have my own rant about EdTech. So you must have read about Byju's, right? And how when people download, then they also automatically end up signing for a loan. Someone is sweetly saying we would like to hear the rant. Thank you, Anand. तो ये जो एडटेक वाले हैं, I think वो भी अपना धंधा चला रहे हैं, and this kind of expectation कि that will be some kind of substitute is, I think anyway online education is a very poor substitute, even when it works properly, is not a good substitute for in-person, in-class learning, because as Jean also said, there's peer learning, there's learning from the teacher, there's all kinds of other things going on when you're in that physical space together. But जो edtech है उसमें बायजूस का तो केस काफी अच्छे से documented है कि वो आपके डेटा के पीछे हैं, आपके मतलब वो ऊपर से जो मतलब कपड़ा पहना है वो एजुकेशन का है, लेकिन उसके अंदर और भी कुछ छुपा हुआ है. और बायजूस के केस में वो जबरदस्ती लोन बंडल कर रहे थे और लोगों को समझ भी नहीं आए. 30 डे या 90 डे फ्री ट्रायल था और उसके बाद उनके पीछे पड़ गए कि तुमने लोन लिया है, और उसकी वजह से लोग काफी परेशान हुए हैं. एंड देन आई थिंक आल्सो इफ दे आर डेटा माइनिंग, कोई चेक नहीं कर रहा उसके प्राइवेसी कंडीशंस क्या हैं, तो वो ही फिर आपको बाद में एजुकेशन लोगों को जो ठीक से समझ नहीं रहे इस पूरे इकोसिस्टम को, डेटा माइनिंग के इकोसिस्टम को, उन्हीं का फिर उनको जबरदस्ती हायर एजुकेशन लोन्स या कोचिंग क्लासेस या ट्यूशन, इन चीजों के झांसे में फंसाने की भी कोशिश कर सकते हैं कि यू नो these are parents who are desperate to get their children educated, so they look for your vulnerabilities and then they exploit those vulnerabilities. So that's like a no-go, I think, from my point of view.
I think the craze for digitization is something that we have seen in many contexts in the last few years, partly driven by Digital India and all the money that went into that. Demonetization was a dramatic example of vested interests pushing for digital payments and causing a lot of trouble for a lot of people. But there have been many other examples of counterproductive applications, including, for example, in the Employment Guarantee Act. Now it's also happening in health, it's happening in agriculture, it's happening in online education. So none of this is to say that there are no constructive applications of online education. I'm sure there are. at least in schools that have the required infrastructure, which is not the case for the majority of rural schools in India. But the manner in which online education and digital systems in general are being pushed for their own sake, largely under pressure from business interests, I think that is something that we have to resist.
Yes. Okay, so there is this question about whether this survey has documented the experience of students with disability and if we can share them. So I came across few students who were disabled and I can speak about that and then maybe you can take on. So while in Nanoli, I guess we came across almost 3 students who were physically disabled and all 3 of them were enrolled in ashram schools. So ashram schools are schools where they stay and learn. Oh, now the question was, since the ashram schools were closed and ashram schools are far away from your villages, so they are not in your village. So there is no access to those schools. So at least those children who go to village schools, they can meet up their teachers or go for ration, or maybe their teachers can conduct some classes for them. Like Alimuddin sir was mentioning that they bring children to some other place and like they take classes for 2 or 3 hours. But these children who were going to ashram school, they were completely cut off from formal education. They never met their teachers or anything like that. But there was this one student that we came across. His teacher actually used to come to his home and would help him prepare for his study. So he was preparing for this Navodaya exam, and his teacher would come to his house and like take his classes like twice or thrice in a week. So, I think I think the government has left everything on the goodwill of the teachers, that if the teacher is willing to take on so much of effort, then only the children will get something or will get educated, or else they don't care. So, yeah, that was the instances that I came across about disabled students. Ritika, you want to share anything on this?
I think apart from you, there were 1 or 2 cases in Delhi, but there were very few and hardly any special provisions.
Mohit, you want to say anything?
I didn't come across any children like that, and as Ritika said, I surely didn't hear of any special provisions for children facing disabilities or anything like that. So
Okay. I think this is the last question that I'll take on. So there is a comment about it, and then there is a question, and it's about the Adivasi students. So, Karishma says that although we are discussing Bahujan students in general, Adivasi students have always been at the disadvantage since most or all of us speak in languages that are not state languages. The schooling is mostly done in state language. This is also a reason for dropping out of Adivasi students. And then there is one question that Swati had written to us. I'll just read out her question. She says consolidation and rationalization under Niti Ayog's Saath-E project, where primary and upper primary schools with few students are being merged with bigger schools. In Odisha, most particularly in Schedule 5 areas where schools in faraway tribal areas which have few students are to be consolidated, and it is said that they will get cash transfers for transportation, etc. But many say that even if they might get cash transfers, many might still drop out. And with COVID, already there is uncertainty, and students in faraway tribal villages are not getting proper access to education. So, how might this policy affect going forward? This is what Swati is asking. Ritika, anyone?
Joe, we're waiting. You're on mute.
Yeah, I thought you had asked Ritika to speak. So on this tribal languages, the point is absolutely well taken. And in fact, I had mentioned in the context of the Mawadar that the local language of these children is not even Hindi. And now they are being expected to learn not only Hindi, but English and Sanskrit. It's absolutely absurd. So that's why I said, just drop Sanskrit at the very least. And of course, start with the local language. I think it's well accepted among educationists that children, at least at the beginning, should learn in their own language. I would add to that another disadvantage that Adivasis face is this problem of social distance I mentioned earlier. For example, in the case of Mahamadar, the fact that the block education officer is not an Adivasi, he is a Brahmin who may not be able to relate to the predicament of the local children. I feel in the Schedule 5 areas, all, if not, or at least most of the children should be Dalits and Adivasis, not only teachers, but also the block resource center staff, the block education officer, and so on and so forth. I think that is quite important. And on this merging of schools, I don't have a lot of experience of it, but I have seen some cases of merging of schools in Jharkhand. There are times where it's not obvious that the village is well served by having its own schools. Like if there are only 10 children, it's not always obvious that it's in their interest to have their own school. But I would say that if you merge, then you should ensure transport, not just cash for transport. I mean, there's so many problems with cash transfers, and people may or may not use it for transport. Why not just use organized transport? I mean, in the cities, many children are using school buses. So you could organize local transport also in villages where the schools are being merged. But I think in many cases, they probably shouldn't even be merged at all. And that was again a case of a kind of knee-jerk policy being decided from Delhi, because when you look at it on a computer screen, it looks like it's a good idea to rationalize and get rid of the tiny schools. But the reality on the ground may be quite different.
Yes, okay, thank you. There were a couple of questions more, but I think we're running short on time, so we'll end. Yeah, Ritika, you have to go. Okay. So I think we'll end this here. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Ritika and Mohit, for taking out time. And also we should thank Karimuddin sir, though he's not here, and he made some very important points. And it was really a very engaging and good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll end this meeting for everyone. No